Welcome to an extraordinary tale of valor, grit, and determination of a small group of warriors who defied overwhelming odds to make their mark in history. This is the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, where bravery stood tall against a relentless force that seemed unstoppable. But as we'll discover, their courage wasn't just about fighting, they were also willing to die for something bigger than themselves. They understood the deep power of purpose, and how true strength is forged in the heart. Chapter 1. The context of war in the heart of the ancient world. The stage was set for one of the most decisive battles in history. The Persian Empire, under the rule of King Xerxes, was an unstoppable force, unlike anything Greece had ever seen. Xerxes wasn't just a king, he was seen as a god among men, wielding an empire that stretched from India to Greece. His ambitions were as vast as his empire, and he believed that nothing could stand in his way. But here's the twist: Xerxes' immense power was based on overwhelming numbers, in resources, in sheer size. His army, which some estimates say numbered over 100,000, could drown any force that tried to defy it. His navy was vast, and his soldiers were endless. Yet, despite all of this, Xerxes would face a force so small in number that it seemed almost laughable. These 300 Spartans would be the ones who would hold the line. But before we dive into that fateful stand, we need to understand the broader context of the war. Greece wasn't a unified nation at this point. It was a collection of independent city-states, each with its own culture, leaders, and priorities. The Persian Empire had been steadily advancing, subjugating one city-state after another. And now, Greece's most powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, were at risk of being wiped off the map. But there was something different about these two cities. Athens, known for its naval power and democracy, had already faced the might of Persia at the Battle of Marathon. The Athenians, though outnumbered, were able to outmaneuver the Persian forces and win an astounding victory. But Persia was not done. And now, it was Sparta's turn. The Persians had taken the initiative by crossing the Hellespont, and their relentless march towards Greece would bring them closer to the heart of Greek civilization. The Greek city-states needed to unite against the threat of annihilation, but this unity came at a cost. The Spartans were a proud people, their warrior culture so steeped in their ideals that they often seemed unwilling to compromise. Sparta had one mission: to defend its land and its way of life. And when King Leonidas received word that Xerxes' army was marching towards Greece, he knew that this was the moment to act. Chapter 2. The Spartan Way of Life. In the story of Thermopylae, the numbers on the battlefield might seem like the most important detail. But what often goes unnoticed is the inner life of the Spartan warriors themselves, their mindset, their philosophy, and the way they were raised. Sparta wasn't just a military city, it was a system, a way of life. From the moment a Spartan boy was born, his future was determined. If he was strong, healthy, and fit to survive, he was kept; if not, he was cast aside. This was the Spartan way, a brutal, unforgiving system where only the fittest could survive. Once a boy reached the age of 7, he entered the agoge, a rigorous training program that would mold him into a warrior. It wasn't about learning how to fight, it was about learning how to live, think, and survive as a Spartan. They were taught endurance through pain and suffering, the ability to go without food or sleep, to stand firm in the face of fear. By the time these boys became men, they were warriors, not just physically, but mentally. A Spartan didn't just fight for victory, he fought for honor, for the state, and for the generations that came before and after him. And Leonidas? He was a product of this system. His leadership was shaped by the harsh realities of Spartan life, where failure wasn't an option, and courage wasn't a virtue, it was a requirement. Leonidas knew that when the Persians came, it wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about standing tall in the face of a force that could obliterate everything he loved. But there was more to the Spartan warrior spirit than just brute force. Spartan warriors were tactical, strategic, and deeply philosophical. They understood the value of discipline, of planning, and of knowing your enemy. They weren't just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting to preserve the values that made them who they were: honor, freedom, life. Chapter 3. The call to defend Greece. When King Leonidas received the message that Xerxes was marching towards Greece, he had to make a decision. It wasn't just about defending his city-state. Sparta wasn't in immediate danger. But this was about something far more important, about the future of Greece as a whole. The Greeks knew that if they didn't stand together, they would fall individually. And Sparta, with its disciplined warriors, was going to lead the charge. Leonidas knew that Xerxes' army was so large that no one expected them to win. But the Spartans didn't think like that. They didn't think in terms of odds. They thought in terms of duty. Leonidas' call to arms wasn't just about securing victory, it was about sending a message. He knew that if the Spartans stood firm, it would rally the Greek city-states to unite. It would ignite a fire of resistance in the hearts of Greeks everywhere. Leonidas didn't ask for a large army. Instead, he chose to take just 300 of his best warriors. These 300 were handpicked not just for their strength, but for their courage, their willingness to sacrifice everything for Greece. And they didn't just follow Leonidas because he was their king. They followed him because they believed in what he stood for. They believed that the Spartan way of life was worth dying for. Chapter 4: The Battle of Thermopylae. The battlefield at Thermopylae was a narrow pass, a choke point in the terrain that gave the Spartans an incredible strategic advantage. With just 300 men, they held the line against Xerxes' vast army for 3 days. 3 days of fierce combat. 3 days of defiance. 3 days that would echo through history. What made this battle so remarkable wasn't just the bravery of the Spartans, it was their tactics. The narrow pass at Thermopylae was the perfect place for the Spartans to make their stand. It negated the Persians' overwhelming numbers and turned the battle into a war of endurance. Where the Spartans excelled, they formed a shield wall, a tactic that had been perfected over years of training. The Persians, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers, were thrown off balance. They didn't know how to fight in a confined space. But the Spartans were a well-oiled machine. Every strike, every movement was executed with precision. The battle raged on for days, with the Spartans holding firm against wave after wave of Persian soldiers. They fought with a ferocity that few had ever seen before, and yet the odds were still stacked against them, but they never wavered. Leonidas knew they couldn't win the battle, but he also knew that they could win something much more important: the will of the people. The Greeks, watching from afar, would know that the Spartans stood in defiance, and that spirit would give them the strength they needed to push forward. Chapter 5: Bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. The Battle of Thermopylae wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for ideas. The Persians, with their seemingly endless numbers, represented everything the Spartans stood against. The might of Xerxes' empire, with its immense army and resources, could easily overpower smaller, less trained forces. Yet the Spartans stood their ground. Why? Because they understood a truth that many in history have forgotten: bravery isn't about facing a foe you can easily defeat. True bravery is about standing firm when the odds are stacked against you, when retreat seems like the only option, and when victory feels impossible. Leonidas knew this better than anyone. He had trained his entire life for this moment, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. He understood that the true purpose of the battle wasn't to defeat the Persian Empire, it was to make a statement, to say to the world, to Greece, to the future, we will not bow. We will stand. And as the battle raged on, it became clear that the Spartans were not just warriors, they were symbols. Every sword strike, every shield raised, every life given was a message. The Persian numbers were overwhelming, their tactics brutal, but the Spartans fought with a ferocity and a purpose that could not be broken. The first day of the battle had been brutal, but victorious for the Spartans. They pushed back the Persians, held their ground, and left Xerxes in disbelief. The Persians had not encountered anything like this before. Their warriors were skilled, but they lacked the one thing the Spartans had in spades: resolve. The Spartans fought like a single unit, moving as one, thinking as one. Their shields locked together, their spears deadly and precise. They formed a wall of armor that the Persians couldn't penetrate. The discipline of the Spartan warriors was on full display. Each movement was calculated, each strike executed with the same intensity as the last. The first day ended with the Spartans still standing, their numbers intact. But they knew they couldn't hold out forever. Xerxes wasn't going to give up so easily. And so, the next day, the Persian forces came again, this time with more fervor, more determination. But still, the Spartans did not falter. They fought not just for themselves, but for something larger. They fought for the future of Greece. They fought for their families, for their way of life, and for the ideals that had shaped their society. Every swing of their swords, every block of a blow, was an act of defiance. As the days passed, the Spartans faced overwhelming odds. But it wasn't just the sheer number of the Persian army that made this battle so harrowing. It was the psychological warfare that came with facing an enemy that had already crushed everything in its path. The Persians were known for their ability to demoralize and break their opponents. But the Spartans weren't like anyone else they had faced. The warriors from other Greek city-states watched in awe as the Spartans stood firm. Their courage wasn't just inspiring, it was contagious. The Greek city-states, who had been divided by internal conflicts, began to recognize the power of unity. And the legend of Thermopylae would become a rallying cry for the Greeks in the years to come. Chapter 6, The Legacy of the 300. The Battle of Thermopylae ended in tragedy for the Spartans. With their position compromised and surrounded by an ever-growing Persian army, Leonidas and his 300 warriors knew that their time had come. But even in the face of certain death, they did not retreat. They did not surrender. They did not yield. Instead, they chose to fight to the end, knowing full well that their deaths would serve a far greater purpose than any victory could ever provide. Their sacrifice would become the foundation for a legend that would inspire not just the Greeks, but the world for millennia to come. Leonidas, knowing that his men would not survive the final assault, made a choice. He dismissed the majority of the Greek forces, leaving only the 300 Spartans and a small number of allies to make their final stand. This was not a decision made out of arrogance or pride. It was a decision born from the understanding that they had already won something far more valuable than any battlefield victory. In the end, the Spartans fought to their last breath. They fought as they had lived, fiercely, honorably, and without fear. Leonidas fell, but his legacy would not die with him. In the wake of their deaths, the Greek city-states were galvanized. The story of the 300 spread like wildfire across Greece. It became a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, a story of honor and sacrifice that would forever change the course of Greek history. The legacy of Thermopylae would live on not just through the stories told by poets and historians, but through the actions of those who followed in the footsteps of the Spartans. The Greeks united, and in the following year, they achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Plataea, ending Xerxes' invasion once and for all. But the lessons of Thermopylae were not just about military strategy, they were about something far deeper. They were about courage, honor, and the unbreakable will to stand for what you believe in, no matter the odds. Soft, reflective music plays, bringing a sense of closure and introspection. The story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae is not just a tale of ancient warfare, it is a story for all ages. It is a story that transcends time and place, speaking to the heart of what it means to be human. In a world that often seems dominated by power and numbers, the Spartans showed us that true strength lies not in overwhelming force, but in the power of conviction. They understood that bravery is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to face it head-on, to rise above it, and to stand firm in the face of insurmountable odds. We live in a world where challenges seem to grow bigger every day. Whether in our personal lives, our businesses, or on a global scale, the forces we face can sometimes feel overwhelming. But the lesson of Thermopylae is clear: we are capable of more than we think. When we stand together, when we fight for something greater than ourselves, there is nothing that can stop us. The Spartans didn't win the Battle of Thermopylae, but they won something far more valuable: their legacy, their ideals, and their story. And that story continues to inspire us today, reminding us that courage, honor, and sacrifice will always have a place in history. As we face our own battles, let us remember the 300. Let us remember that in the face of overwhelming odds, we too can stand tall, unwavering, and resolute, knowing that the true measure of our strength lies not in our victories, but in our willingness to fight for what we believe in.